Welcome back to another Technique Coding programming tutorial. In this video, we're going to expand upon the concept of the UIKit coordinator pattern. This is a viewer requested video. The original video I made of the UIKit coordinator pattern was pretty simplistic. It just included the auth screens, login, register, and then just a regular home screen that was pretty bare bones. So many users have been asking for an expanded version on that to a more complex situation to see how it's really put together. So I will be showing hopefully most of the situations you'll see out in the wild, although with programming, the sky's the limit. You can probably figure out for yourself like different ways to implement what I'm about to show you. So without further ado, let's show you what the final product is going to be. This is going to be a multi-video series on this because it does take some time to set this up. So here's actually the end goal. This is going to be very simplistic. We're not creating any custom views or any very customized views that look flashy. We're just trying to focus on the navigation here. So just like in the last tutorial on this, we have a simple login screen. You can click the register button. You go straight to the register screen. You can go back and forth however many times you want. If you go to register, click on register, it leads you, after this little prompt, to a confirm email address. So this is basically two-factor authentication screen right here where you can add in your code that you get in an email. After you get it, you can hit submit. And then you get a little pop-up. When you hit OK, it'll bring you back to the login screen after I get this little prompt from iOS. After that, we assume that you have the login credentials and your account is activated. None of this is set up in like through network or with the backend. This is all just hard coded in just for an example. So for instance, we could just hit submit here. If we hit submit, we go to a tab bar navigation right here. This would be your home page. For whatever reason, we have locations here, just as a small example. And then the more screen emulates the iOS's native more screen just on the third tab rather than an overflow page. Just to give you some context, what I mean by overflow pages, if you use a tab bar down here, the native tab bar, and you add more than, I think it's 4 or 5 tabs, iOS automatically rolls any tabs above and beyond 4 or 5 tabs into an overflow page called like more. We're just creating this from scratch. I don't really like their out-of-the-box solution, but in any case, the more screen includes a few screens that are also available from other screens in the app. So, and I have a visual, I'll go over like what the navigation actually looks like, but just know this. There's multiple flows in this that are reused and multiple screens, or a couple screens that are reused. So for instance, we can access the upgrade screen from this location, from the location screen. Then if we go in the more screen, we can also access it. Same thing with the locations. This is an entire flow that includes accessing your account and the upgrade screen. From another flow, we can also access the same locations. This is very useful if you have multiple areas where you have to show a flow. So the upgrade flow is a great example of this, where you might want to show this screen from different locations in the app that are paywalled. So this flow allows you to do this very nicely, albeit it is verbose in the code base. But once you set up and understand it, you can do some pretty great things, and you can actually adjust navigation flows very fast. It's saved me and my clients multiple hours, if not sometimes days or weeks, of changes in navigation logic just by having this coordinator pattern in place. Now, with all that being said, this is what it's going to look like. So we've got a key here, and I'll explain this. You don't have to really memorize this. This is here for my own self-interest, I guess. So when we log into, when we open the app, what you'll see is on the root level, we have an application coordinator. This coordinator, all it does is it facilitates moving from the two main flows. not to be confused with me naming one of the flows main flow. So we have two root level flows, I should say. One for the auth flow and one the main flow that is everything else in the app minus the auth flow. You can have more depending on your needs, but this is just an example on how you can do this. Adjust as needed for your own use case. So in the auth flow, once we're done and the user actually authenticates, logged in, signed in, registered, however you have this set up, it's going to actually delegate back up to the application coordinator, and we're just going to hit the same block of code that asks, are we logged in? If we aren't, it'll just go back to the auth flow. This seems like an infinite loop, but this is never going to happen, and you'll see why here once we get in the code. But you log in, it's going to go to the main flow. Inside the main area of the app, the user can then log out, and then it will just go back up and then hit the auth flow again. So this is just very simple. It bounces between the main flow and auth flow. That's the primary use case for the application coordinator. Now, there's a couple other things you can do in this coordinator. It's up for debate whether or not you should put some of this stuff in there, but the way I set it up, I put a couple other things in there, like some hooks for notifications sometimes, and I'll explain that once we get to that screen. Now, inside each of these two root flows, we have all of these other screens, and this is the entire navigation of the app. If we go back to it, I can show you kind of what we're seeing here. So within the auth flow, so if I actually log out, so if I go in my account, log out, we are in the auth flow right here. So what we just did was we were in the main flow, we logged out, and it brought us back to this auth flow. So the auth flow is shown right here. It's got a login screen, which can bring you to a register screen, or if you sign in, brings you to the main flow. You go from the login screen to the register screen, just like this. Once the user submits the information in this form, you hit register. It'll lead you to a confirm email screen for a two-factor authentication. Now, from here, you hit submit, code submitted, and it brings you back to the login screen. And that's it. This is the entire flow right here. Now, we can go to the register screen, and I know I don't have a back button up here right now for it, but I do have this login screen. That's something we can actually fix within the tutorial. So then from here, obviously, we can hit submit to go to the main flow, and that main flow is the home flow. Main flow includes this tab bar navigation right here. Let me move this a little bit over so you can see it a little bit better. So this tab bar, we have the home flow right here, locations flow right here, and the more flow right here. What you'll notice in the code is that each one of these little blue boxes right here actually represents a coordinator. This coordinator then, i.e. coordinates the navigation between these flows. Now, what you're seeing here when you see these different colors is a lot of these minus these white boxes with black borders on them. These are all reused. So this locations flow that I showed you here, where we have access to locations here and from within the more screen, there's two different locations to access it. That's what you're seeing right here in this spot right here, and also from within this more flow sub navigation right here. You're seeing that these screens are reused, so you're not creating or copy and pasting navigation logic all over the place. This is one of the reasons I really like the UIKit coordinator pattern. Is it's, in my opinion, I found it very useful and very reusable. In a future video, I'll be making a more advanced version of the SwiftUI pattern, and then what we can do is we can compare and contrast the two to see which one is best for your use case. But the UIKit coordinator pattern is going to be very important if you're trying to support legacy apps that use only UIKit. Or if you want to use SwiftUI screens in UIKit. Actually, this tutorial includes SwiftUI screens for everything you see here. The navigation is the only thing in UIKit for this tutorial. So inside locations tab, we can access the upgrade screen from this little crown, and we can access the account flow by tapping the Your Account button and goes back into this account flow. From here, it's just the normal account flow that you can access from the More screen as well. Click on this. And in the More flow, just to reiterate, we have access to all of the other screens, and including an entire sub-coordinator in the locations flow that we can access the screens again. So pretty powerful. Just to go over the account flow here. Let me move it over just a little bit more. The account, you can see your screen right here. You can edit the account. And in this case, if we don't change anything about this email, we're just going to go straight back to the account screen. If we do, then it's going to go to the same confirm email address for two-factor authentication to make sure you are who you say you are. Whenever you have one of these change in email, what you really need to do on the back end is you need to set the new email as a temporary email. And then what you would do is you would send out a two-factor authentication email to that temporary email. And that's how you would authenticate whether or not they are who they say they are before you actually commit this. So if you say Adam instead of John, hit submit, we are brought to this confirm email address. We could go back to the edit account screen with this little back button, or we can hit submit and it leads us back to the account screen. Again, I'm not persisting any data. This is only navigation. So there's some things that are going to look broken. That's the intention of this tutorial, to keep it as simple as possible with navigation. Okay, with all that being said, let's start by creating a project. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to Xcode and my other window here. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is obviously start a new project here. It's not going to be SwiftUI. We're going to say storyboard. Even though we're not using storyboards in this project, you want to start it off as a storyboard first, and then we can edit the project as needed for our own use case. Okay, so we're going to call this. It's not really advanced coordinator, so we'll say just UIKit. Coordinator pattern. Okay, so from here on out, hit next. We will save this in our advanced right here. So hit create. Cool. So the first thing you want to do whenever we start a new storyboard project, you're going to see this launch screen. We're going to keep the launch screen here for right now, except we're going to add one thing. We're going to add one label. And for those of you who don't know what this is actually a storyboard that we're looking at right here. You don't really have to pay too much attention to this. I'm just adding this label so we can actually see a splash screen to save our own sanity. Cool. We're going to refresh that to move it in this correct position. And we're going to just say, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Boom. Okay, so whenever we launch the app in the simulator, this splash screen will show up. Okay, so from here on out, we actually want to delete this main storyboard. We don't want this. iOS will default to trying to open that main storyboard up because we chose this to be a storyboard project, but we don't actually want that. So what we're doing is we're going to set up this project without storyboards. And let me resize my window here so everyone can actually see my screen. Bring this down. Cool. Okay. So the first thing we need to do to set this project up is we actually have to go into our project, tap on the target right here. If you're not familiar with build targets, I can go over the interface of Xcode in the future, but we're just going to skip that for right now. I personally tend to like to add a lot of context to my videos, but due to time constraints, I'm trying to limit myself here, so bear with me. I like explaining things. Okay, so
the first thing we want to do is we want to go into the info. This used to be, I guess they must have changed it, but this info right here, this info.plist file, should be connected to this info tab right here. Apple is primarily moving forward with putting the info plist right from within this tab within the target. So this is where we're going to actually edit from. To make it so we can use programmatic UIKit, we need to delete this the main storyboard file base name. And we also need to delete, we are not going to use scene delegate here. This just makes things a little confusing. We can also get rid of this view controller right here. So back into the info, we can get rid of, somewhere in here, the scene manifest. At this point in time, we should be okay to create our first view controller. Inside the app delegate, we do have to clean this up a little bit because it's going to refer to the scene delegate a little bit, and we don't need any of this stuff. All we need is this right here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a directory. You know what we're going to do? We're going to change these to groups. I will talk about this a little bit. There's a difference in Xcode between groups and folders. Folders are actual folders. If I go to show in Finder, if I used a folder, UIKit coordinator pattern, it shows as a folder here. But from here on out, because I changed this to a group, all files are going to be listed in a flat list underneath this, unless you specify their grouping as a folder. The reason I like doing this is because if it's a group, I can actually right click and sort by name. If it's not a group, I can't do that, and it drives me nuts. Do with it what you will, but this is just the way I do it. In any case, so now what we want to do is we're going to create a new group. We're going to call it screens, just to place all of our screens in here. I like doing this because the way this ends up being organized makes a lot more sense for new developers. It's my own philosophy that if a developer can't understand what you're trying to do within 10 minutes, then the code needs to be cleaned up. It's not always possible, but it's a great thing to strive for. And having a directory actually called screens is pretty straightforward. Okay, so in our screens, what we're going to do is we're just going to create a very, very, very basic SwiftUI screen. And we're just going to say, I don't know, we'll call it test view. The first thing we want to do always when you're setting up a new project like this and you edit some of the settings, you just want to test that something's on screen. Technically speaking, I guess I could have left that placeholder view controller, but we're going to use SwiftUI for this instead. Okay, so now that that's good, we're going to wait for the previews to generate this real quick. Cool. Okay, so we're good to go. Okay, so now what we need to do, because this is a SwiftUI view and we're using UIKit to show this, there is a quick way to handle this. One thing we need to do though is we need to see var window. Okay. Whenever, you might have seen this in one of my other tutorial videos, but whenever you have a SwiftUI view, it's actually really easy to turn that into a UIKit view controller. You use you use a UI hosting controller to wrap that SwiftUI view. And we can do that just like this. First off, we want to say let view equals test view, and then we say UI hosting controller. And we say root view is the view. And then from there, we can do a UI, let's see here. So we got the controller. So what we do is we need a window. Window equals UI window frame UI screen dot main dot bounds main dot bounds. And then we say window dot root view controller equals controller. And we actually need to import for the hosting controller. There we go. Just to reiterate, this is within the SwiftUI library. That's why we're getting that error. Now we need to say window.make key invisible. This is what actually shows it on the screen. When I was first starting out, this drove me nuts. It took me forever to figure this out. But anyway, what we're doing is we are creating the actual SwiftUI view as a view parameter. We're wrapping it in a UI hosting controller. So this is now UIKit. And then we are creating a window, which is necessary to actually show something on screen with UIKit. We're setting the root view controller as the controller that's wrapping our SwiftUI view. And then we are making it the key window, and we're also making it visible. So from this point on, what we should be able to do is just hit play. I'll let this build. Okay, so there is actually a bug in this, and I'm going to explain this because this is super important for when we get into the coordinators. There's a reason why the screen is black, and that is because this window is being deallocated once the app starts because it's not being saved anywhere. So it's basically an object that is free to be collected, to be deleted essentially from memory. That's why we created that window parameter right here. We need to save the window. This is going to become very apparent when we start to deal with delegates and also child coordinators, because the same concept applies to them as well. Now that we've done that, we can hit play again, and then we should see our screen. Hello world. Great, cool. We have everything up and running. Everything looks good. So from here on out, what we're going to do is we're going to exit or stop this, and then we are going to start straight in creating our first coordinator, and that's going to be the application coordinator. So what we can do is we're going to actually keep the screen for right now because we're going to re-show this here from the application coordinator. So first things first, let's create a new group. And then once we get this application coordinator working, we'll stop the video there, and then we'll continue on to the next one. But what we can do is we will create a new, no, don't want to do that. Just create a new group. Here we go. And what I like to call these just coordinators. If you really want to be explicit, you can just say like navigation in parentheses. I sometimes do this if I know there's people on the team that don't actually know what coordinators are. And then I will sort this. And then within the coordinators, we're going to create a new from template, Swift file, application coordinator. Now, I could start filling this out, but we're going to do one thing that is going to be really necessary when moving forward with this, and we need a base coordinator. All these coordinators need to follow a certain pattern, so we have to create a new object, and here, so porting, and we're going to create a base coordinator class that all of these other coordinators are going to inherit from. Where am I here? Okay, now I'm going to try to go through this quickly, and then I'll explain this. So let me just start typing here, and I'll explain this in a second. So we're going to need UIKit.
Okay. This is the basis of our coordinator. Now, there's a couple other methods we have to add for convenience too that are very important, but this is the basis of it. A coordinator, all its job is to do is it has a presenter that will present screens. That's it. Now, with this presenter can then present other flows as well. So if we go back to our little diagram here, a good example of this is this locations flow. So this locations flow right here is its own coordinator. Now this presenter, if we go back into Xcode here, this presenter can then modally present this account flow right here. Now we are actually seeing this in the original final value right here, where we have the locations right here, and then your account screen is modally presented. Now that is being presented by the presenter. So it's being modally presented, but it can be pushed down there depending on what this controller type is. Now, this controller type can be any UI view controller. It's mainly going to be a UI navigation controller, but for the sake of generality, we're setting it as a UI view controller, which all other view controllers inherit from. So this is a great way to just keep it as broad as possible for any use case. But like I said before, this locations flow right here is actually a UI navigation controller that is then modally presenting another UI navigation controller, which is the account flow. That's why you see it can navigate between multiple screens. So that's what's going on here. The child coordinators are only ever used if there's an entire coordinator flow that has been started underneath the current coordinator. Each coordinator can have an unlimited number of child coordinators. Now, in practice, you'll probably only ever need one child coordinator for each of these, but it's better to err on the side of caution and to be more general at these base levels than specific, unless you have a specific reason to do that. Like everything else in coding, it just depends on your use case. So what we need to do now is add code to manage these child coordinators. And all of this will become clear later on. Don't get too frustrated right now because we still have a lot to go through in these videos. Okay, so first thing is we're going to say func store u. Okay, so the first thing we're doing here, let me minimize some of this so we get a little bit more, is we're just creating a function that stores a child controller. Now remember back earlier in the video how we had this window object here, and then when we didn't set this self-dot window, it wasn't being stored anywhere in memory, so it was being deallocated, which is why we didn't see that screen at first. Same thing goes for these child coordinators. What we are doing is we are providing a mechanism to guarantee that they will be allocated in memory when we start these child coordinators. Now,
technically speaking, there can be some times where the presenter is presenting a screen, which is then being referenced by a coordinator that might keep it in memory depending on the situation. We don't want to rely on that. So what we're doing is we are explicitly saving these child coordinators in memory so that they are retained and not deallocated and won't cause any kind of mischief in the future. What we're doing here is we're saying that we have a generic type U, which is of type UI view controller. We could also do this. I tend to lean on this method of declaring generics because to me it seems a little bit easier. But in any case, we are saying that this generic parameter U should be of type UI view controller, and of course the coordinator needs to inherit from the base coordinator with that type. And then all we're doing is we're saying, hey, if this coordinator already exists, then don't add it because you don't want duplicate coordinators in there. Now, your use case could be different, so you might have to adjust this to your own use case. But in this specific example, we are skipping adding duplicate coordinators. And the way we identify a coordinator is by using this UID. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is we need to add a free method. We need to be able to get rid of these child coordinators. So we're going to do very much the same type of thing here. And we're going to say, does the coordinator exist? And if coordinator does exist, then we're setting it to no. Okay, so the last function we need in this is a free all child coordinators. And we're just resetting the dictionary. And it wants me to be specific. Cool. Let's see here. I guess we can add that in. So if you want to actually fetch a coordinator, we won't be using this in this tutorial. There's better ways to do this, but there are some use cases where you might need this. So if you want to fetch an actual coordinator, what we can do is we can say child coordinator T for key UID. These generic property names are very arbitrary. I'm just kind of, winging it. Cool. So yeah, we are going to list the child coordinators. We're saying first one where the dictionary value equals the key, and we need to fetch the value, which is the actual coordinator, and we're just trying to cast it as the expected one from right here. And that's how you can actually get it. So, yep, that's it for the base coordinator. I'll just go over this one more time. We are creating a coordinator, which will handle the navigation. It's got an ID to identify it in the future, list of child coordinators that we're saving in memory so that it's not deallocated. The presenter is where all the magic happens. This is the object that's actually going to present the screens. And we'll see this being hooked up in the application coordinator here in a minute. And then we get the start method. This one, now I didn't mention this yet, but this start method is required for all coordinators. All coordinators need to actually implement this. If it doesn't do that, then this base method is going to be called and it's going to crash the app. We want this because it's expected to be actually implemented. This start method is what's going to be called for every single coordinator after you create one, and it's going to be what actually puts a screen onto the presenter. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back over into our hierarchy. We're going to go back to the application coordinator, and we're going to create the exact same thing we originally created inside the app delegate. And for some reason, my brain's not working here. Okay, here we go. We're going to redo this except in an application coordinator. It's going to be very basic. In the next video, we'll actually populate a lot more of this, and you can start to see everything unfold. So we're going to say UIKit. And it's the first base coordinator we have, and we are going to say that the generic presenter type is a UI nav, if I could spell right, navigation controller. Here, we're actually going to store the window object now. And we're going to say init window UI window. In this case, we are not going to be using the original initializer. We're not going to override that because this one requires a window object. Technically speaking, we don't actually need this window object, but I pass it in. It's going to be shared between this and the actual application app delegate. So we're going to say self.window equals window. And then we're going to say, and right here is where we're going to create our first presenter. Every single time, aside from this application coordinator, unless you have a specific use case, we are actually going to pass in the presenter. This is the only time, at least in this project, where we create it within the coordinator itself. So we're going to say let presenter equals UI navigation controller. Presenter is toolbar hidden equals true. And then we're going to say super.init presenter. Cool. We're not done yet though. Now we have to say self.window.rootViewController again is the presenter. And we say self.window.makeKeyInvisible. Then from within here, we have to say override func start. And then from here, we can then say let view equals, what do we have here? Test view, like controller equals UI hosting controller, which again is SwiftUI. So we actually have to import SwiftUI here. UI hosting controller, root view is the view, and then presenter dot set view controller animated false. Okay. So then within the app delegate, we can just remove all of this code. And then what I tend to do, and actually let's not store the window object in the app delegate. See what happens here. I think there's a reason for this, but anyway, let's keep going. We're going to say var application we're going to force unwrap this because this should always exist. That's the whole point of this pattern, is this should never be optional. This is required to run the app. So we're going to say ApplicationCoordinator equals ApplicationCoordinator. We need the window object, so we can say window equals UI window frame UI screen dot main dot bounds window. And then all we have to do at this point is say ApplicationCoordinator dot start. So it cleaned up our app delegate quite a bit, and now our navigation is in this application coordinator. Now, because everything is set up, we should be able to run this again and see the exact same result. And there you have it. It went fairly quickly. If we actually force close out of this, we'll see the splash screen first, so we can So we can exit out of this and we'll run it again. Splash screen and then hello world. So we're back to square one where we started, but now we've got this nice application coordinator to start the navigation logic. The one other thing I like to do, just as a rule of thumb, is I actually like to make an extension. And you're going to see this throughout this entire series where we have application coordinator. We have functions that actually start things. So we're going to say func start main. This is going to correlate to this main flow right here. Or we could just say, start auth, because that's where we're going to start. So this is actually going to correlate to this flow right here. And then we can just copy and paste all of this stuff right here. And what you'll notice is that within this application coordinator, this is where we're going to say something like if is logged in, else star main, which isn't created yet, star auth, like this. So we're back here to this flow, the root, and this is where in the start method, this is where we have the logic where we're going to switch between the two, between main and auth. But right now there is no main, so we are just going to leave auth for right now. And then in the next video, what we'll do is we'll start creating out this auth flow, and hopefully we can get to the main flow as well in the next video. So in any case, I hope this gave at least a broad overview of kind of like the coordinator pattern so far. The next few videos we'll start to get in the nitty-gritty of everything, and it's gonna be pretty interesting. But I'll try to go slow. I'll try to explain things as best I can for you, because once you understand this, it can help you a lot. It is a little bit of boilerplate, so it's not useful in every single context, but for large-scale apps that require specific flows that may change all the time or have complex flows, I've not yet seen another paradigm than this that works as well as this does. So yeah, leave a comment to let me know what you think about this, or if you have any other suggestions for videos, and I will see you in the next one. Happy coding.